So it's been a week since I posted a video. I know I got a new question from a friend of mine, Anol, about the Old Testament, why God gets progressively nicer from the Old Testament to the New Testament and all that. So, there's a lot of other people who've already kind of answered that question, and a lot of people answer the question in their own way. There seems to be the issue of progressive revelation. So, if I were to take that and kind of reformulate it from the perspective that I'm coming from and how I'm viewing all of this, first thing I want to say that the Old Testament is definitely worth reading. It's worth reading in its own right. It's absolutely worth reading with a good, conservative Jewish commentary, or even a liberal liberal Jewish commentary. And then, the New Testament should be read because it can be considered an extremely logical follow-up to the Old Testament. Like, beautiful ideas. Like, it says in the Old Testament, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. So that means when you're in a really, I guess in a serious judicial proceeding, you can at least lie there. You're not allowed to say anything that's false. You certainly aren't allowed to give the wrong impression about anything when you have to testify, when somebody's under judgment of being, executed for crime, But Jesus, would take that further and says, let your yes mean yes, let your no mean no. Everything else comes from Satan. It's like, you'll be held to account for every idle word. Everything you say must be true and correct. And it's like, who doesn't want ultimately to act that way and feel that way? So anyway, the New Testament can be considered a very logical follow-up to everything that you see in the Old Testament. The Old Testament's filled with miracles that violate the laws of physics. The New Testament's filled with miracles that also violate the laws of physics and, I would suppose, the laws of biology. They are simply not true. Now, why are they not true? Was somebody trying to deceive you? Well, that's a really interesting question. You have to go through a lot of historical analysis. So many parts of the book of Genesis were written at different times by different groups and then edited by different people and then translated from one version of Hebrew probably to another version of Hebrew, and you're reading it in English, and it's like, okay, so what did they really mean when they said certain things? And that's an important point. And then a lot of these books were written in the context of other books that existed at that same time that have long since been, made an awful lot less popular by history and or completely forgotten about. So, a lot of those miracles are happening in conjunction with, the fact that other books are saying miracles happen. So maybe we need to put some in ours, or maybe somebody is telling us that these miracles happen, or they heard that a miracle, or somebody's saying, making a mistake in remembering the memory of it, and so then, things get garbled in translation and things get more fantastic as time goes by. By no means am I saying anyone ever deliberately lied, though, there might be at least one essential example of that. So the idea of progressive revelation, well, let's think about what a real spiritual person would do. Let's think about a Jewish guy 3,000 years ago, a Jewish woman 3,000 years ago. Moses, or somebody that knew Moses, or, somebody 3 generations after Moses. The person is doing everything right. They pray. They don't ever lie as a rule. They care about their community. They care about the other people. And they're also naturally very intelligent. There's an intelligence continuum. There's people out there whose IQs are quite low, and there's not much you can do about it. From everything I know about psychology suggests that, you have a certain fixed intelligence that can only be lowered and never really raised through your life. It can be lowered through alcoholism and things like that. So, you've got an intelligence continuum. Some people will come along who are ultra high IQ. They have a really good diet. They're always able to see things more clearly than everybody else around them. They're really filled with love in their heart. They want to do good for other people. Doing good for other people sometimes means being nice, but also sometimes means being harsh and to criticize, to correct, to set boundaries, things like that, to make rules and laws, and that's what goodness sometimes involves. And so you could easily see somebody in that situation who goes through prayer has a mystical experience, maybe because of eating mushrooms or has a mystical experience. I absolutely had a mystical experience in my youth, that was connected to prayer and connected to being righteous and connected to being good. And I had a mystical experience to this day I'm still baffled by. Was it, a psychological response to the difficulties that I had in my life and the desire to make things better? Or what was it? And to this day, I still look back upon it with wonder. I think that's one of the reasons why I'm reading a book about how the brain works, because I want to understand that better. But there's a lot of other things I want to do as well. That's just a small part of it. I've lived with my own private revelation from God, as it were, since 1998, so it's 2023. I didn't do the math. I mean, that sounds like 25 years. So, so I've lived with my own private revelation that I've received from God for 25 years. And I've always respected the rule of the Roman Catholic Church to say, well, private revelation is all well and good, but it's still, you don't know what the source of it is. And you don't know, and that's why everything should be offered up to the church for analysis and making sure, hey, if you're going to talk about that, or, maybe we should double check on you, which I always thought was pretty well. So anyway, what am I saying? Go back 3,000 years and go to some righteous human being that is naturally very intelligent, is trying to do everything right, and they have some kind of mystical experience, and they're like, God has said unto me, don't eat pork, because everyone's dying with trichinosis. They see the clear connection between eating this pork and getting that trichinosis disease or something. I'm like, God has spoken, and God has said don't eat this pork, because the person knows that if he says it in the name of God, and he thinks he's saying it in the name of God, that person sees themselves as somebody anointed or a prophet. They start to see themselves that way. I've had those possible understandings about myself. I've talked to many people that have those. I talked to a Muslim guy that it sent chills up the back of my spine when he talked about the revelation of Muhammad. And it was like, and I know that's contradictory with other revelations. I know it is. It just is. So then what? Where do we go from there? But I can see why the Old Testament would have that. God has pronounced judgment upon anyone who would look at the idol, and God will do this, and God will do that, and God will punish, yeah. I can totally see some mystical guy who's looking the mistakes that the community's making and trying to correct that behavior. And then, we don't know what was in his mind and what was his actual intentions. But many, 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 many generations and translations of words, I'm not saying that we're getting it all wrong. We could get a lot of it right. But many generations and many translations of language later, maybe, what are we truly left with here? So, I mean, should we not eat pork? Because, certainly it's Judaism doesn't allow it and Islam doesn't allow it, but Roman Catholics allow it. And why do Roman Catholics eat pork? I think there's something in the book of Acts where Peter had a dream and it said, thou shalt not pronounce unclean that which I have proclaimed to be clean, or something like that. I haven't read the Bible in a long time, but boy, I used to read it a lot. So I just, I'm just remembering what it said. And I think that was part of the scriptural basis why, suddenly, Catholics are allowed to eat pork, but the, Old Testament and Muslims can't. But I offer, essentially a new understanding of religion. I would say whether or not you should eat pork should be based upon scientific inquiry. Whether or not you should eat pork should be, well, what does a dietitian say? What what does somebody with a PhD in nutrition say? I mean, that's how we should that's how we should be thinking. And again, I am not saying worship of God, ritualistic or otherwise, is bad. I think it might absolutely be necessary. But, but we have to look at the world that we actually live in clearly. And the more we look at the actual world that we actually live in clearly, the more we might be able to actually understand God the more we might actually be able to follow through on good religious principles. And so that's where I'm at with that. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't want to, cancel the Catholic Church. I don't want to cancel the Methodist Church. I don't want to cancel Islam. I don't want to cancel, any form of Judaism. There might be some religions I want to cancel. Satanism, maybe. I hear negative things about Scientology, never looked at it. I hear, things like about Christian Science, which I've actually studied and actually appreciate. There's some things I learned in Christian Science that to this day I wonder about and say, that wasn't so bad actually. I haven't studied the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith, but I have relatives that, I have connected relatives that follow Joseph Smith out to Utah, and so I have a familial reason to want to be a part of that group. And then that's the thing about the love that I have in my heart. I can't think of any time in my life where I didn't want to be part of some group. And I think that's love in my heart. It's probably the theory of evolution and progress, because people who want to be part of other groups are more likely to survive, through the 100,000 year evolutionary history of our species, going back 10 million years ago to that common ancestor we had that was a huge mountain gorilla type thing, and and so forth. If I want to be part of a group and I mesh myself in with a group and do what I can to make that group work better with each other, then I'm more likely to survive. And I am ultimately a product of how many successful men. My father was successful. He had 2 children. His father was successful. He had, 3, and his father was successful. He had 1, and, his father was successful. I don't know how many William Grow had. And I could keep going and keep going and keep going and keep going. 66 men back, I probably have German ancestors who fought the Roman legions in Teterboro Forest in 6 AD. I can keep on going. And I think that analysis, which we clearly get from the evolutionary record, from digging in bones, reading history, and then exploring what's probably true in prehistory, is obviously clear and true. There's no question. And it's not to say that Genesis, the book of Genesis, is a lie. It's not to say that. It doesn't say that at all. They were acting on the best that they understood, possibly now. They were acting on the best that they understood at the time that they were writing, in light of, and there's many beautiful things in that book. There's many beautiful things in it. There's to dismiss it categorically, like, I remember Sam Harris talking to Jordan Peterson about the resurrection. Sam Harris goes like this. He goes like this. It's obviously a lie. The resurrection of Jesus is obviously a lie. And I'm like, I agree with Sam Harris. Of course it's obviously a lie. But to say it like that is stupid. It's stupid on so many levels. It's stupid because why do so many people want to believe it? How about address that instead? And I can, the resurrection of Jesus is a story we should be grateful for what it has produced in humanity, possibly. And there's, what are we going to do, in light of that? So just to just absolutely contradict it and say that it's false is the dumbest approach to it possible. The other approach that I hear from Peterson was the approach of it's more than true. Okay. So, well, there's an awful lot more to say there, but that's my response for now. Hey, Anol, if you keep asking me questions, I'm going to keep posting videos. And maybe someday there'll be more than just one person listening to this stuff. I love you, man. Be good.